if you saw the Juror B37 tapes, as we showed you on the Young Turks, you have a sense of a person who clearly came at it from a, let's put it politely, a non-African American perspective. Like, she didn't seem to sympathize with Trayvon too much in terms of like, my God, what happened to this poor kid? There seemed to be a lot of like, well, it's his fault just as much as George's fault. And God, golly gee, I feel sorry for George because he got himself in that sticky situation and he overreacted a little bit. Now, if you empathize with the kid or his parents, if somebody shot my 17-year-old kid, I wouldn't think that that was a little overreaction when he was going to get Skittles. I would think that that was an unbelievable outrage. So you have that issue. But do those racial assumptions that she made, and I think pretty clearly made, make her a racist? That's an interesting question, and one I wanted to discuss here internally at the Young Turks. Jayar, very curious as to your opinions.
Well, like I was saying earlier, there's prejudice. You know, you believe things about a certain group of people that you don't know, that you don't have any experience based on. So you have these assumptions, which I think is pretty obvious. She's prejudiced. And again, people hear the term racist, and they think you have to be donning a Klan hat and you have to be snarling and foaming at the mouth and then run after and want to murder every person that you are prejudiced against, or want to put some kind of power over. You're ignorant. You're blind to the fact of what certain groups of people are. So you think that, oh, well, if I see someone walking down the street, because as we said, she associated the mentality that George Zimmerman had. Well, he's walking down the street and there have been break-ins, and he was a kid who fit the description. So, of course, he'd follow him. He's on edge. That's the way it works. It shouldn't work that way. That's the thing. The whole group of people is not the same person. Every time you see a black person doesn't mean that they all broke into houses because some of them did before. I don't know how that distinction doesn't cross the line. So in that aspect, yes, she is, because you assume that, oh, well, one black person did it. That means as soon as I see another black person, I'm afraid of them. That's the first thing that happens. You're afraid, which is why you had your gun. Because if I get in a fight or any confrontation with a black person, they must have a gun. They must want to kill me because, you know, black people, they're violent and they're strong, animal-like. They might rip my head off. I need a weapon because I'm a pussy. So she associated herself with everything he thought and internalized because she thinks the same way. I think it's obvious. I mean, again, there can be discussion whether or not the racism part, because then the racism part goes to whether or not you believe this particular group is higher than another particular group. She just doesn't know anything about black folks. Therefore, she doesn't associate herself with them even being human.
So you're drawing the line at, I don't know if you're going to bother to call her a racist, you know, that's, and again, it's a very loaded term, et cetera, but clearly prejudiced. Yeah. That's what you're saying?
Definitely.
All right. Jesus, thoughts on that?
I wanted to just say this, that she's just prejudiced and she just lives in her bubble, but it's so hard with just the terminology she used. It's hard not to call her a racist. You know what I mean? Because it just feels like this whole thing of not having good judgment at the moment. Like, everybody doesn't have good judgment all the time, but when I have bad judgment, it doesn't cost somebody else's life.
When it does, you go to jail.
And exactly, and when I do, even if I'm not affecting anybody, I could go to jail. I could just be affecting myself and I still go to jail. So I'm leaning more towards, yeah, like she's ignorant and she lives in her bubble, and I'm going to say it, she's racist, yeah.
All right, so you're going even a little further than Jayar. So my problem, guys, is that I'm conflicted about her because I didn't sense any antagonism, right? I didn't sense any bad intent. So I don't think that, you know, I partly, as Jayar was pointing out, I don't think she thinks like, oh, these, you know, effing black people, I can't stand them. Or as Zimmerman said, they always get away and all that stuff. So I don't want to blame her. I want to talk to her. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, but I understand what you're saying, Jesus. Like, I think it is fairly inconceivable, based on what we heard in that interview from her, that if the roles were reversed and it was a 30-some-odd-year-old, fairly large black guy, and he'd killed a 17-year-old white kid who'd just come home from getting Skittles, et cetera, and the white kid might have been big and might have gotten the upper hand and punched him in the nose and et cetera, that she would have thought, well, this black guy killing this 17-year-old kid, well, Georgie just had a little misjudgment there. The next sentence seems to be, what's the big deal? But this is a giant deal. As Jesus said, you can screw up a piece of judgment. Maybe it costs you $70 because you didn't fill the meter in time and you got a parking ticket. But in this misjudgment, someone died. And when it's a 17-year-old white kid, my guess is that community would have been enraged. And they would have thought it was a giant deal and not a little misjudgment. They would have thought it was a giant misjudgment, as it is, as it would have been, right? But in this case, poor Georgie, right? And to me, I don't feel comfortable calling her a racist. Are there racial components and a racial perspective there? Definitely, definitely. Is Jayar right in saying that she's prejudiced in that? Even if she doesn't realize it, I think that's a very fair assessment by Jayar, that there's prejudice there. But that's really the problem for the whole country, not just for Juror B37 or these jurors overall. It's that we can't see things from each other's perspective. And I'm shocked by it. You remember Time to Kill, a movie that Matthew McConaughey was in, etc. And I remember the big ending was, imagine if instead of it was a black girl, it was a white girl. And I thought it was like the worst ending in the world. I was like, okay, what difference would it make? When he was saying to the jury, because the girl had been raped and killed, etc., and her father had done vengeance based on that. And I thought, wow, what a lame ending. What if it was a Chinese girl, right? But it turns out I was wrong. Apparently for people, that's a giant, they don't even think about it, so it would be like a big revelation, like, oh my God, you're right, what if it was a white kid that died? Wow, then I would have hated it. So, my God, we've got to communicate better with one another, and we've got to at least walk in the other person's shoes for a little while so that we don't have these racial misconceptions, right? It's not to say that no black person's ever done a crime. Of course not. Or any white person. It's not to say that everybody is perfectly innocent and you shouldn't be worried about people doing burglaries. Of course not. But you also can't judge every black person in that community as guilty until proven innocent. And if, by the way, they're shot, then the burden of proof falls on them to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that they were innocent. Otherwise, they're shot and there's no justice at all, right? That's too high a burden to put on our fellow Americans. I hope we have that conversation. I hope this is the beginning of it. I'm not overly hopeful about it, but at least we've started it here.